Hello, folks. Welcome to Rational Science, the only site on the internet that does physics rationally. We have a great day today. I'm going to have some of the questions answered up front because some people asked types of questions or made comments regarding some of the topics of extinction and also of dimensions, which is what we've been doing lately. And so I'm just going to be, having the lecture together with answering the question. So we're going to begin with topics related to extinction that I've raised lately. And some people had questions or made comments about them. Here's a synthesis of what I'm going to cover. Okay. Disease conspiracy. Homosexuality has been around since the beginning of time. When autism is caused by old age pregnancies, women get pregnant at the wrong time. Atheism is not a religion. And God, is God an object or a concept? Kind of interesting or important to answer that question if you're going to try to find out whether God exists or not, right? Because before you can talk about existence, I think you first have to determine whether God is an object or a concept. Does the table exist? Well, is the table an object or is it a concept? Does it matter? Does love exist? These are the questions we're referring to. Anyways, let's go with the first one. Here we have one gentleman and he makes a comment, okay? That we've been dealing with more or less lately. Okay, so I'm going to try to answer him. And he says the following. He says, what have we learned from Bill Gates about patents? He's referring to my federal case. I had a federal case, okay? We have learned that companies never patent their sequential work processes. For example, a microchip. In other words, he's referring to the specifications, right? And I'm sure that Pfizer, a company, this is a company that does health things, drugs, right? Never patented their modifications either. Okay. Why should the competitors make big money? Why should Pfizer voluntarily give the blueprints into the hands of its competitors? But if they did patent it, the patent itself could have been a Trojan horse, so you can blame the enemy. Okay, so I know a little bit about this subject because I researched it for my federal case. And I can tell you one thing is that you cannot patent a process. You cannot copyright a process, okay? Can't patent or copyright it. Why? And there's several reasons. I'm just going to give you one that I'm sure you're going to be able to, absorb very quickly. And that is that a process like, specifications to build a chip could be the specifications to build a drug, some antibiotic or whatever out there. Those change constantly. We used to change the specs almost every day. And for example, in my case, I would change the specs maybe on the average anywhere between 1 and 2 weeks. And we had our engineering manager, his name was Preston Snuggs. He became vice president of AMD later on, of devices. And Preston, he would receive specs from different engineers. So he probably was signing specs every day. Maybe I modified them once a week, but for sure he had lots on his desk. And so we modified the process on a periodical basis. You receive new machines or you find a better way of doing a process or whatever, you have to change the spec. And so you cannot patent every time you change the spec. Okay, you can see that that's a problem. So process cannot be patented and process cannot be copyrighted. So they invented, the secret copyright, the secret patent, so to speak. Patents are things you put in the public domain so that the government knows what it's protecting. Here they invented the invisible patent. You can patent without registering it. You have protection without registering. So that's more or less what happened. But yeah, you cannot patent or copyright a process. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, one argument against it. There's more than that, but I'll just give you that for now so you have something to think about. Another fellow brings up another issue, says you can analyze homosexuality, but it has been around as long as humans. Has it? Uh-huh. Homosexuals are born that way. They do not have a choice. Yeah, we see eye to eye on that issue. I think that's the case. Um, Hermaphrodites have both male and female genitalia, etc. Baal, Lucifer, has both XX and XY. Chromosomes are both male and female genitalia and is a hermaphrodite. Not sure what he's saying there. Okay, if the ancients thought this, then that too has been around for as far back as before BC. Okay, the first thing we need to address is Baal. Baal was modified over the centuries. Okay, Baal was not always a bad guy. Okay, in fact, even today, Baal just means the head of the god, something like Zeus. Okay, over time, some people converted Baal into a bad word, and he became like the devil, and then they put different sexes to him. So we don't know when all that happened. That's the first thing we would have to research. Okay, but I can only give you my 5 cents worth, and I've been investigating homosexuality since 1985. I know that for a fact. That's what, 38 years ago. For 38 years. On and off. It's not like I investigate it every day, but I think I know a little bit about homosexuality. Not because I'm homosexual. No, but there's other reasons. Too lengthy to cover today. Things that happen in my life with other people, and so I had to start investigating them. And one of the things I can share with you today is what I've found out over the centuries, okay, since then. And here's the first one, okay? This is for you to take into consideration. A lot of people think that homosexuals become according to what they eat or how they were raised by their mothers or pressure from society or who knows what, And I agree with this other fellow. I have the same foundation. Homosexuals are born that way. Okay, they can't do anything about it. Just like you're born, maybe looking at the right sex, the women, or women looking at men. That's the standard, right? And these people are born with their brains in such a way that they're looking at the wrong sex. Okay, at the same sex, and that is the wrong sex. And I'll tell you why. It's a wrong sex because sex was invented probably by plants. That's my guess. Plants had sex before, I think, animals, and maybe simultaneously, but I would lean towards plants. And we're talking about here the Cambrian, way back when. But the issue is sex was made for reproduction. And same sex is not reproduction, no matter how you twist and turn it. And so there's something that is changing. And I think it's lately, okay? This has not been there forever. So here's the first bit of evidence that I'll put forward, okay? And here we have the Code of Urnamu. And here you see other codes, all the way to Hammurabi's code. And you see the dates more or less there, about 2,000 years before Christ, anywhere between 1,700 to 2,000 years before Christ. None of them dealt with the issue of homosexuality, which is quite a coincidence. I mean, these are cities from different places. They're nearby, they're in the Middle East, but they're different places, and none of them mention homosexuality or anything in the code punishes homosexuality or favors it for that matter, right? Okay, so you won't see it there, which is quite interesting, at least for you to take into consideration. Doesn't mean you have to believe it or reject it or whatever. Just keep it in mind, okay? Some people get all excited. Okay, here's another bit of evidence. This is the Book of the Dead of the Egyptians, about 1,500 years before Christ. And this was something that a person who was about to die had to confess, because otherwise they would not go to heaven. And there's only a piece there that I show of the entire papyrus. You can look it up, you'll find out it's a very long papyrus. And essentially, the person who was dying had to confess many things, and among them, this was one of them, that he had not had sexual relations with another person of the same sex. Now, that same passage has been translated differently by different people. Some of those, especially the last two, are homosexuals, and so some of them try to cover it up, some don't. But the point is that this is a passage that is in the Book of the Dead, and you might want to consider it also when you think about whether homosexuality was here forever, since the beginning of man. But here's the first instance where homosexuality appears in the books, okay? And it was in the Code of Asura, okay? This is the evidence that we do have. Maybe it happened before this, but we don't have any evidence of it, okay? So this is a fact that you can look up. Code of Asura was from the days of the Assyrian Empire. That's why it's called Asura. And we have the code from Tiglath-Pileser, which was 1100 years before Christ, but the code probably extended even before then. And for the first time, we see what it says. It says, if a man secretly says of his companion, one may have unnatural intercourse with him, or in a brawl in the presence of men says to him, one has had unnatural intercourse with thee, I will prove it against thee, but is not able so to prove it, nor has proved it, this man shall receive 50 lashes, do king's work for 1 month, be mutilated, and pay 1 talent of lead. And in the next one, more clearly, it says, if a man has had unnatural intercourse with his companion, if it has been proved and ascertained of him that he has had unnatural intercourse with him, he shall be castrated. Okay, so castration was not only for eunuchs, in meaning people who were slaves, but it could be for someone who engaged in homosexual sex. Okay, so these are this is in the code. Okay, we have that code today. It's been translated more or less. Okay, I mean, I don't think you can screw up the translation that much so that it's completely ununderstandable. No, we understand what these people were telling us from 1100 years before Christ. Okay, here's the Hittite code. Okay, from around the same era. It only has one little chunk. The rest of it has nothing regarding homosexuality, and that is if a man has intercourse with his son. And then you get to Leviticus, which is maybe 1,000 years after the Code of the Hittites, maybe 500 years after, depending on when this all started. Leviticus probably dates orally before 500 BC. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. And we all know these are known as the clobber clauses of the Bible. Okay, and you can look them up. There they are. And it says, thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. Okay, why? Because otherwise you will be put to death. Okay, so the penalty was death. None of these cultures, none of them, not one, favored homosexuality. They all punished them severely. It was frowned upon. You'll find a lot of homosexual books today, and they'll say, well, we were always loved, but then the Catholics came around and they started convincing people to hate us. That wasn't the case at all. Okay, these people are simply talking nonsense. Homosexuality was frowned upon from day one. Whenever they saw it, they said, what the hell? What is that? That's what? Unnatural sex. That's how they put it. Okay, and they were kind when they said that. Okay, and here you have the parts of the Genesis. Okay, first book of the Bible. First one has to do with Sodom and Gomorrah. Why is it called sodomite? To sodomize someone? Well, because of this. Because it's got to do with the city where this code comes from, and it was a code that everybody just was born with. I don't think you needed to put in writing, but it was in the Bible anyways. And they used the word no for the translation. And you might say, well, what do they mean by no? It says, bring them out unto us, talking about Lot and angels that came to visit him, and some men of the town surrounded the house, and they wanted Lot to bring the two angels out so that they would know them. What do they mean? Well, you see it in the next sentence. It says, I pray, brethren, do not do so wickedly. Behold, now I have two daughters which have not known man. Okay, and he said, do with them whatever you want. So I guess we know what they're referring to when they say no. Okay, Corinthians, the New Testament, and Romans, they talk about effeminate men and men doing it with men. Okay, and it's all frowned upon. Nobody favored it. There was no law, natural or otherwise, or written law. People simply saw that as an abomination. Okay, so yeah, we do have in the record, we do have an idea of what people thought in those days about homosexuality. And here we have Greece. You had the Code of Solon, okay, also about 500 BC, 600 BC. And he wrote a couple things in there related to homosexuality. Xenophon talks a little more about it, and if you look up his book, and yeah, he essentially says that Solon frowned upon sexual version of pederasty. Plato and Aristotle also said it was not favored by the Greeks. But if you have any doubts, you got to go to Against Timarchus. You got to look up that. It was a trial, and it had to do with Aeschines. Aeschines was someone who had gone to. Give me a second here. Let me show up again. Aeschines had gone, he was an Athenian. He was sent as an ambassador to Philip II of Macedon up north. Macedon had a big army. Philip was beating up all the little city-states up north, and he was going to come down to Athens. And so they sent Aeschines up there to pacify Philip and say, look, be nice to us. And so when he came back, he says, hey, we have peace. I have reached an agreement. We have a treaty with Philip. And Demosthenes, who was a very important man, orator in Athens, he said, look, what Philip did was bribe Aeschines. He bribed him. So Aeschines is a traitor to Athens. Okay? And so they brought a trial against Aeschines. And the prosecutor was Timarchus. Okay, so Timarchus brings a case against Aeschines, and Aeschines does not defend himself, saying that he's not a traitor or that he was bribed or anything like that. He says that Timarchus has no standing to bring a case against him because Timarchus is a homosexual, that he's lent his butt to the sailors in the Piraeus, okay, the port, the Athenian port, and because of that, he had no standing to sue because he was not a citizen of Athens. And what you'll see in Against Timarchus is the whole Athenian code against homosexuality. Okay, so people today say, oh, all the Greeks did it, all the Romans did it. Absolutely not. It's ignorant people who say that, okay, or people who have some political agenda. Athenians, or Greeks in general, Romans, they were all against homosexuality. There were laws against that, and there need be no laws because people had this natural revulsion towards homosexuality. Okay, here you have the Romans, and they had the Lex Scantinia, and I think it was who was it? I don't think I can remember who it was, but it said the half man, fears the Lex Scantinia. And why? Because the Lex Scantinia punished homosexuality. Okay, and so the homosexuals who were still around, the few that were around, they had developed codes just like we have codes today in the homosexual world, where they detect each other because they know some of these codes. Okay, but essentially Rome, the Romans in general regarded it as a Greek vice, and they would call it that. Okay, so no, in ancient Greece, um, Rome, Egypt, Babylonia, Assyria, all cultures were against homosexuality. And I haven't mentioned the Aztecs, haven't mentioned the American Indians. They had the two spirits. Well, there's a whole bunch of information out there. The Vikings also. You'll find all kinds of information out there, and it was all in every culture. It was all 150% against homosexuality. So those people who say that no, it was accepted and that it was forever, that it's been there since day one, no. We have to explain why it wasn't in the code of Hammurabi and the others like the Code of Ur and so on. No, they didn't have it in those codes. And so it could be interesting to speculate that maybe homosexuality started appearing or started appearing as a problem maybe anywhere from 11 to 1500 years before Christ. That's probably where we can locate it according to the record. Whether you believe the record or not, that's a separate issue. Okay, but that's my take on that. Okay, you can do your own research. This is not for you to believe, it's for you to understand what I'm saying. Some of the evidence that's out there, you can look it up and reach your own conclusions. Okay, another fellow raises another issue similar: the rise in autism and general mutation madness is due, referring to transsexuals, right, is due to women delaying childbirth and their resulting faulty eggs. Okay, this doesn't affect third world countries hardly at all, of course. Is that true? Okay, well, some of it may be true. Maybe the fact that women are delaying having children at older age, men as well, by the way, so you have women having babies at the age of 40, men having babies at the age of 50, maybe, with a woman who's 40. Yeah, I think that could be a serious problem. Okay, used to be that girls would have children at the age of 15, and today we think that's rape. So culture has changed a little bit. Okay, so that's one side of it. The other side is, uh, whether it has anything to do with what this fellow said, And here we have some evidence, okay, that I can provide to him that it's not solely because people are old, but there are some genetic disorders, okay. In other words, we have our gene pool has been washed up. Okay, we don't have much genetic diversity among humans. And you can see this in the Amish, which is a small piece of the human population, very small piece. Here you see it. Health is characterized by higher incidences of particular genetic disorders, especially among the old order Amish. These disorders include dwarfism, Angelman syndrome, and various metabolic disorders such as okay, as well as unusual distribution of blood types. Almost all Amish descend from about 500 18th century founders. I think the number was more closely related, more closely to either maybe 2,000, 1,500, maybe even 3,000. Okay, but okay, the point is that it's a few hundred. Okay. Genetic disorders that come out due to inbreeding exist in more isolated districts. Okay, an example of the founder effect. And yeah, there you see some example. Polydactyly is associated with mutations. Okay, it's a genetic problem. And Amish have a disproportionate number of cases there. They also have dwarfism. There you see an example. And Angelman syndrome, genetic disorder that mainly affects the nervous system. Symptoms include a small head and a specific facial appearance, severe intellectual disability. Yeah, and it affects not only Amish but relativists. Okay, so be aware if you become a relativist, it might affect you as well. Okay, so what can I show you about that? I'm saying that this has to do with genes primarily. Autism and homosexuality both have to do with genetic, these are genetic disorders. Okay, people are born that way. They can't do much about either. Okay, and why do I think that? Well, there's several reasons. I'm just going to give you a couple of pieces of evidence. Okay, here's one. which is Calhoun's experiment, which I've talked about in the past. And here you're going to hear it more or less from the horse's mouth, a lady who talks about the experiments. Listen to this.
The third period, consisting of 300 days, found the population of mice leveling off. But the newer generations of young were inhibited, since most space was already socially defined. At this time, some unusual behavior became noticeable. Violence became prevalent. Other young mice growing into adulthood exhibited an even different type of behavior. Dr. Calhoun called these individuals the beautiful ones. Their time was devoted solely to grooming, eating, and sleeping. They never involved themselves with others, engaged in sex, nor would they fight. All appeared as a beautiful exhibit of the species, with keen, alert eyes and a healthy, well-kept body. These mice, however, could not cope with unusual stimuli. Though they looked inquisitive, they were, in fact, very stupid. Dr. Calhoun called the last period the die phase, leading the population into extinction. Although the mouse utopia could house 3,000, the population began to decline at 2,200.
Okay, so the issue here is that they started with 4 couples and they let the mice reproduce. And so we have many factors there that have to be considered. One of them is the fact that they were crowded after a while, right? 300 days or whatever. There are lots of mice in there, and that's one issue. And so people say, well, you know, you have society here. We're all in the city. There's a city. We have cities of millions of people. Does that affect us? Does that affect our mental state? And then you have the issue that all the mice descended from 4 couples. Okay, so we were talking with my son Hans, and we said, look, maybe the way they should design the experiment next time is create holes so that as the population expands, you open up more space for them. Okay, so the mice can, as the population gets to a certain density, you open up the gates, so to speak, and they can move to a bigger environment, okay, and so on. You keep expanding the place, but the founder's effect cannot be undone. All the mice descended from the same 4 couples. And the question then is if you're going to get the same result. If you're going to get the same result, you're going to get autism and you're going to get homosexuality, which is also one of the issues that Calhoun observed. Then it means that it's the founder's effect. That's what really was the main factor that ended up with that result. Okay, so this is one of the things you got to look at. And then, of course, for both homosexuality and autism, you got to look at, you know, what I said the other day, and here it is. You know, you have lions and you have sheep. People say, well, it's what we eat. It's all the poison that all these companies put in the food, and maybe it's climate change. Who knows what they suggest? And they think it's, you know, maybe a conspiracy by rich people to corral the poor people. Who knows? But that's not the case with lions and sheep, and they have homosexuality among them as well. So, you know, whenever you talk about politics and you talk about poisons that they're putting in our bodies through food or through whatever out there, the animals don't have, in the wild, right, do not have the same influences, and they're having the same results as humans. So you got to look at the animals, why that's the case. You can't just blind, you know, cover your eyes and say, well, that never happened. No, you got to answer that. That's a phenomenon. Okay, and so if you deny it, well, you're denying a fact. Now, you don't deny something that destroys your theory, but you got to go and find out why it's the case. Okay, so that's all I can tell you. Okay, another issue here. We have atheism. Okay, and this fellow says This is incorrect definition, the ones that I put up there. An atheist simply doesn't believe in the God claims of others. They do not assert that a God can't or does not exist. Agnosticism is about knowledge, not belief. You are posting misinformation. Okay. First of all, let me just say that knowledge and belief are synonyms. And so that's the first answer to this file. So the fact that this fellow says knowledge, that it's agnosticism is about knowledge, not belief, all he said is synonym. Knowledge is justified through belief, and no one has ever defined it any differently. As much as they twisted and turned around, they could never define the word knowledge. Knowledge is belief because knowledge means that you know, but the other guy doesn't know the same knowledge that you know. Okay, and so it comes down to belief, and you can't turn and twist that in any way to accommodate the word knowledge other than as a belief. There is no difference between knowledge and belief. Knowledge is just stronger belief. That's how you can define it, maybe. But it's belief. You ultimately believe. Okay, but let's address the other issue. Whether an atheist doesn't believe in the God claims of others. Okay, and again, he's using the word believe. Keep that in mind. It's not about belief, but atheists don't believe. And we'll find this from all atheists. And by the way, I used to be an atheist for most of my life, so I'm a little bit ashamed to say that, but today I'm not an atheist. What am I? I'm a scientist. Scientist is different than an atheist. Atheist is the religion of mathematicians, of people who don't know the scientific method. That's why atheism is still around. Otherwise, we wouldn't have atheism. Okay, so atheism, this is from the Wikipedia, is in the broadest sense, is an absence of belief. This is the way they see it. So yes, it has to do with belief, because either you believe or it's an absence of belief. It's denial of belief. What are you saying? You're saying the opposite of belief. You disbelieve. I mean, you can put any word you want in there. Disbelieve, not believe, refuse to believe. It's got to do with belief. It's just the opposite of belief. Okay? And that's broadly atheism as a rejection of the belief, right? That any deities exist. Okay, so yeah, and it's contrasted with theism. So yeah, that's what atheism is. That's why it's atheist. It's the opposite of theism. If theism is the belief in gods, well then atheism is the disbelief, the non-belief, the refusal to believe, the knowledge that you don't believe that there are gods or that there is a God. Okay, so here's what American Atheist says. What is atheism? Atheism is not an affirmative belief that there is no God, nor does it answer any other question about what a person believes. Which this fellow said, yeah, we don't believe what the other person believes. But see, here they say the opposite. They say that doesn't answer any question about what a person believes. It is simply a rejection of the assertion that there are gods. And notice that they avoided the word belief when they're saying the same thing in different words. The rejection of the assertion means belief. And that's an opinion anyways, which again is a belief, so they haven't said anything. And here you see the next, another line there. So to be clear, atheism is not a disbelief in gods, or a denial of God. It is a lack of belief in gods. So they keep saying the same thing in different words. That's all they do. They just keep chasing their tails around. Okay? Says they do not believe in gods. Those people are atheists. And there they prove again, because they say that if you do not believe in a God, you're an atheist. And here they just finish saying that that's not what atheism is. So they keep contradicting themselves because they continue coming back to the word belief. They cannot avoid it. And there, one of the statements they have in there says, atheism is about what you believe. So yeah, they keep chasing their tails around. They want to avoid the word belief, but at the same time, they use the word belief every time they want to define atheism. So they haven't said anything. I like to say that atheist is an individual who believes in Bohr's planetary atom, because that's their symbol. The icon they use there is the planetary atom, which is ridiculous. That's what atheism apparently believe in today. And I call it the religion of the mathematicians. Why? Because mathematicians have this mathematical method which has to do only with evidence, prove, persuade, convince, convert, recruit, all those words there, all the way to award prizes and authority. That's what the mathematical method is all about. It's about persuading, convincing people. It's about recruiting. And that's not what science is about. Science is not about proof. We don't prove the existence of God or the non-existence of God, and we do not force our opinions on other people. Okay, that's not what science is about. So this is where we part company with the atheists, and atheism is simply an attempt to prove that there are no gods, okay, or God, there is no God. And that's not what we do in science. In science, we say something very different. We say, let us assume that there is a God. We make an assumption. God can only be an assumption. God cannot be a theory. We do not prove the existence of God. We make the assumption that God exists and then proceed from there to explain our theory. Maybe that God created the universe or whatever you're going to explain next. But God is an assumption and can never be a theory. Okay, can never be an explanation. Okay, and people don't understand that. That's where especially atheists, because they don't want their religion being destroyed. Okay, so here's American atheists again. They say the following. They use this little trick, word wizardry. Okay, it says, what is religion? Well, this is me. It's belief, opinion. And does this make not believing a religion? If you don't believe, are you also a religious person? That's the question. And so atheist says not believing is not a religion. Okay, so if you don't believe, that doesn't make you a religious person, because religious people are people who believe, not people who don't believe. And they say it's like stamp collecting. You say if you stamp collecting is a hobby, right? Is not collecting stamps also a hobby? That's in the context in which the atheists put this non-belief. And it's not a fair analogy, okay? Because in the case of belief, it's an on and off, black or white type of issue. You either believe or you don't believe. And if you're going to call it disbelief, you're going to say withhold belief. I don't know if I believe. All you're doing is just rolling around in circles. Okay, belief has nothing to do first with existence, so you should never use the word belief in terms of existence. Okay, because as soon as you put believe or disbelieve or not believe or any way you want to phrase it, all you're doing is giving your opinion. Okay, in science we don't give opinions. In science we explain objectively so someone understands. For that we make an assumption. We say let us assume God exists, and you can explain all you want. Okay. Okay, so here's my definition of atheism from American atheists. This is how they go around in circles. Okay, atheism in a nutshell. We do not affirm that God does not exist. They do a not there, double negative. We reject the assertion that God exists, whatever that means. Okay, so all they said is the same thing in different words. They're trying to avoid the word belief, and that's all they're doing here. And they say atheism is not about belief. Okay, what is it about? Atheism is the disbelief in the belief of others. So they twist and turn it and bend it any way they want. They always end up in the same way. Why is this the case? Because this comes from mathematicians. They have the wrong scientific method. They've had it all the way since the days of Newton and Galileo, 17th century so-called scientific revolution. No, it was a religious revolution. To this day, we're doing religion in official science, in mainstream so-called science, mainstream physics. It's not science, what they're doing. What they're doing is, trying to explain with equations. On the one hand, they're doing experiments and measuring and then inferring, and they take those inferences and they turn them into facts and they shove them down your throat saying we proved it. That's mathematics in a nutshell. That's why we do not agree with mathematicians. Okay, they have the wrong scientific method, and that's why they are atheists. And atheists, again, they have never figured out the scientific method. That's the whole issue. Okay, so here we have, this is what atheists like for you to believe, that atheists are opposite to religion, to religious people, and we'd rather put it like this: atheists are religious people. They are religious people because they talk about belief. Belief is opinion, and we don't care about religion in science. We do not say that we believe or don't believe in the existence of God, or that we don't know whether God exists or not. We define the word exist. And then if God meets the definition of the word exist, he exists by definition, pursuant to the definition. And if he doesn't meet the definition of exist, then God doesn't exist by definition, pursuant to the definition of exist. So we define exist as an object that has location. If God wants to exist, first he's got to, for anyone who makes that assumption, right? Giving a presentation, he's got to first present God as an object. He can't say God is a concept. That's why we need to determine whether God's an object or a concept. And a concept is a relation between two objects, therefore it can't be a standalone thing that you can illustrate. We do not illustrate relations. God is an object or God is a relation. Okay, and if you pray to a relation, well, you're praying to an inexistent God, because that God does not meet the definition of exist. Exist, an object has to have location. If it has location, if God has location, for example, we'll assume he's a human form, as the Bible says, fine. Then there's got to be a distance between my chest and his chest. Very simple. Okay, then God has location. God exists by definition. And that's my assumption. I'm saying, let us assume that God exists. Now you can follow my presentation, because I've made a case for the assumption that, in other words, you have to accept my assumption at face value to understand my theory. That's the only purpose of the assumption. Okay? That's the way it works in science. Not, hey, I believe in God. No, I don't believe in God, and I don't know if God exists. No, that's not science. That's religion. Okay, all of it. Okay, here we have a rundown of that, of the mathematical method. Atheism is the religion of mathematicians. Okay, it's the irrational scientific method. Why? Because they harp on evidence, on proof, on knowledge, verification. They say we must verify your results. None of that has anything to do with science. Okay, in science, we explain objectively so that you understand the mechanism that we're proposing. And we're talking about physics here. Okay. Physics, we're interested in mechanisms, in how the universe works. We want to know what gravity is. We want to understand what magnetism is. And for that, we make assumptions. And from those assumptions, we build our theory. And if you want to introduce God, no problem. We have no problem with you introducing God. You have to introduce, but if you're going to talk about God, like, God made the universe or made the perfect world where the bee buzzes around the flower, no problem. You can make your case, but you have to begin by making God exist. And for God to exist, he's got to meet the condition. He's got to be a physical object. He can't be a concept like love, okay, or intelligence. And so he's got to be something. He can be a wall. He can be a chair. I don't care what you think of God, but it better be something that has shape. Okay, that which has shape. That's the definition of an object. And that's not enough. He's got to, if God wants to exist, he's got to have location as well. Okay? Then you can say, okay, he has a way of influencing something in the universe. Otherwise, if God is a concept or God doesn't have location, then God is irrelevant, period. Okay, and so there you have exist. They have never defined the word exist. They've never defined the word object. So we don't have the two words that we need to determine whether God can be used as an assumption, as a thing, as an existing object. Okay? And yeah, there you have the two definitions. Object, that which has shape, and in order for God to exist, he's got to have location. And until the mathematicians learn those definitions and challenge them, because they're willing and they're welcome to challenge them, but they have to produce a definition for the word object and for the word exist that we will gladly, we'll be glad to tear to pieces, okay, if it doesn't meet those definitions. Okay, another fellow comes around the same notion, and this is why this topic was brought up here in the extinction segment. Have we had the same religion always since man invented religion? And this is his take on this. He said, God didn't become an abstraction in the New Testament. He became flesh and blood. And he's talking about Jesus, God here on earth. That was his notion. And so that's not what we were referring to here last time when we talked about this. We were talking about something else. We're talking about religion, not about whether Jesus is God himself or the Son of God, which was a big fight in the 4th century, whether it was 3 gods or 1, this sort of thing. No, we don't care about any of that. That's not the issue. The issue here is, has the religion changed over time? Okay, what was God originally and what is God today? That's the question. Has God remained always the same fellow or the same thing or the same concept or whatever? And the answer is no. Obviously, God has changed, just like, we used to have many gods, polytheism, and then they eventually moved to one God. Okay, and so we originally had a God for every purpose, God of the wind, God of the rain, etc., and God of the sun, etc. And from there we moved to a single God, monopolized all the power in one fellow up there. Okay, and we always thought of God as someone who resembles a human, not as, or I can't say always, but when we started talking about a single God, that God was always a human. It wasn't a cow. It wasn't a lamb or anything like that. It was a human. Okay, he looked like us. That's why the Bible says, he made us in his image, because God looks like us. Okay, God does not look like a cow or a bull or a tiger or whatever. Okay, so here you have the Old Testament. Okay, and you can see that the way they look at it there in the Old Testament, right, is that God created man in his own image, and you hear some or read some evidence that they're talking about a human being, someone who talks, someone who walks, someone who listens, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about human, okay? And the fact that he created man in his own image says it all. We are made in the image of God according to the people who wrote Genesis, okay? The New Testament, a little different, okay? God is no longer this human being who creates the universe. He turns into a ghost. And here you said, the Lord is the Spirit. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, no one has seen God at any time. Yeah, you can't see a ghost, I guess, a spirit. God is Spirit, says John, and he whom no man has seen or can see. Okay, so it's no longer this God that has arms and legs. That God disappeared with the New Testament. We're talking about a different kind of God. The fact that this fellow said, well, God came to earth and turned into Jesus and became flesh and blood, that's missing the point completely. God can turn, in the Old Testament, God turned into a flaming bush also. Does that mean God is a flaming bush? No, it means that, what is God when he doesn't turn into something else? What is he up there in heaven? Does he look like a human? Well, the Old Testament says, yeah. The Old Testament says he looks just like us. He's got a head, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, arms, legs, body. He looks like us. He looks like a man, in fact, unless that changes in the future. Okay. And he doesn't look like, he's not a concept. He's not love. He's not spirit, like the New Testament says and like they say today. Here you have today's version, okay? And here's a couple of people out there, a couple of pieces of evidence that say that what these people are trying to say is that God is intelligence, okay? And you see this across the board. And why? Why did they have to turn God into a concept called intelligence? Well, because, the mathematicians proved to the world that the earth and the universe had a beginning in a singularity. And so these people say, well, we don't disagree with that. Yeah, it started at a singularity, but how did the singularity come about? And they say, well, it wasn't really a man, a guy with arms and legs. No, it was intelligence that created, some kind of intelligent design, meaning came from the mind, and they won't say what's underneath the mind, where this mind is located. They just say it came from a mind, an intelligent mind, because only a mind could have created such a perfect universe or could have created anything. And so they suggest, they insinuate that there is a human being at the end of that yellow brick road, but they're not putting him in the picture. They say, look, there's an intelligent design. Intelligence created the singularity, and from there we have the universe. They had to do that because the mathematicians pretty much proved to the world, that the universe had a beginning, and so these people don't disagree with that. They just say, yeah, we don't disagree. It's just that we have to say how the singularity came to be. And general relativity stops at the singularity. Well, these people go further back and they say, well, we think we know what happened in frame number one, and that's intelligence created this, intelligent design. There was a designer, and the design is the mind, just thought, just intelligence that created the singularity. That's where we're at today. And don't put it past them, because what's happening now is maybe not only are we turning that old God that was, like a man, because we talk about he and him, right? We don't talk about her or she. But, with this transition that's going on out there, don't put it past them that they're going to be having a female God in the near future. And here you see one of the people who protest against the clobber passages in the Bible, which are the homosexuals, and they created the Queen James Bible. Okay, so get ready. The Bible's about to change again. God, religion, the whole thing works is going to change one more time. We haven't stopped yet. We're still thinking about what God is. Okay. 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 So let's move on to the subject matter of today, which is wormhole. Okay. And the question is, what is a what is a what is a wormhole? Okay, we're trying to get to that to this thingy that the mathematicians talk about. They research it. They do a lot of equations out there. Um, are we wasting our time and money? Time is money, right? So are we wasting our tax money on researching wormholes? What is this about? Is this just for Hollywood movies? So we say, hey, we're going to travel through a wormhole to another universe and blah, 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 great fantasy. But they say it's not fantasy, it's science. Is this science? Does this belong in science? Do we have to have any mathematicians on planet Earth working on this stuff at all, or even thinking about it, or even pondering it as even a remote possibility? That's the issue. I mean, is this wormhole something we even have to talk about in science? Do we even have to criticize it? Well, let's find out where we stand. We've been doing lately the universal movie to different concepts, and we're going to have to apply it to the wormhole. So what is the universal movie? Let's start there. A little quick introduction. Most of you are familiar with it, but for new arrivals, they probably don't know what I'm talking about, so let's go quickly through that. Here we have the universal movie, and what we're saying is all static concepts fall in a single frame of the universal movie, whereas all dynamic concepts, the ones at the bottom, they require at least two frames in the universal movie. Now, this is a little different than what general relativity has, okay? Both special and general relativity for that matter. And in fact, it's throughout the mathematical world, okay? And they have to have this notion that time is not the same at the other side of the universe as it is over here. So they don't like, they're not against, they're not in favor of this universal movie idea. They don't know about it, but if they heard about it, they would not be in favor of the universal movie. Why? Because they say it depends on how you measure time. And of course, someone over there is going to measure time different than someone over here because they have different vantage points, okay, different reference points. They're traveling at different speeds, so their measurements are going to be different. We don't care about any of that. That's all nonsense. The universe. Every atom in the universe only has location in one frame of the universal movie. From there, it moves to the next frame of the universal movie, and people say, well, but there's a um, itinerary in between. Absolutely not. We're going to chop that itinerary as much as you want until we get almost no motion at all. We're talking about frames in the movie. Every atom in the universe just moves to the next location. And motion is built through location. Motion is two or more locations of an object. And what is the location with respect to? All other matter in the universe. So every frame in the universal movie only has location, a static concept. There is no motion in that frame. So all this nonsense about special relativity, how you measure and how I measure time, and for you it's faster, for me it's slower, my clock ran faster, yours ran slower, we don't care about any of that. That's all poppycock, nonsense. It's hogwash, okay? So yeah, the universal movie destroys this notion that there's different times in the universe. In fact, we don't care about time. We talk about location, a static concept. And we go from location to location because that's what motion is. If you don't like the definition of motion as two or more locations, you have to provide a definition of the word motion. You have to tell us what motion is, and not like Mr. Newton said, I don't define motion because everybody knows what it is. Yeah. And to this day, nobody has defined the word motion. They define it as change, and change is motion, so change is just a synonym. That's not a definition. We can't use the word change to define the word motion. Okay, we say two locations, that everybody understands because we have two static concepts transform into a dynamic concept called motion. Okay, so here where we put dimensions, something that we're going to talk about today. Lately we've been talking about these, and we said, look, dimensions and coordinates are static concept, whereas what the mathematicians use, which is number lines, are dynamic concepts. Why? Because a number is the verb to count. That's what the word number means. It's to count. We also have vectors at the bottom. Why? Because a vector is a concept that has something moving from A to B. It's a displacement, and that's what we call vector. Okay, and there are three ways in which you can move from a given point. They're all perpendicular to each other, orthogonal, and they're depth, breadth, and elevation. Those are the three vectors. Okay, depth, breadth, and elevation, and all of those involve motion. Okay, so that's why vector is a dynamic concept, whereas coordinate, which is about location, and dimension, which is how something is pointing or facing, both of those are static concepts. Okay, we have to get that straight because we ended up with these black holes that we discussed the other day, the zero dimensionality, the world of the 0D. Is there such a world? Is that a dimension called the zero dimension? Okay, and where did we put that? Well, we don't know where to put it because really a singularity and a black hole are both concepts, but they treat them as physical objects. They're not. They're concepts, and so we have a problem because if they're objects, if we're going to treat them as objects, they're static objects. Black hole does not need to move. It's just something out there in the sky, okay, that supposedly has location with respect to us. The problem comes in that both the black hole and the singularity are 0D, okay, as we explained the other day. And if they're 0D, they're not objects. And so the problem here is that we have a contradiction between whether a black hole and a singularity are objects or concepts. Okay, so this is where the problem is. But if they are objects, we have to put them as a static object. Neither the singularity nor the black hole move. In fact, we cannot imagine a 0D moving anywhere because a 0D is not an object. So we need two locations of an object to create motion, and we don't have an object to begin with. So, I mean, how are you going to move a 0D nothing from A to B? You have nothing. What moved? That's the issue. Okay, so what's the issue? The mathematicians, because they have never defined what a dimension is in a scientific way, they never defined what a coordinate or a vector is in a scientific way, they confuse them with number lines. Because of that, they ended up with irrationalities. They ended up with multidimensional universes. And here you have a rundown. Okay, this is the multidimensional world of mathematics, mathematical physics. We have the 26-dimensional world of string theory, known as bosonic string theory. We have 11 dimensionals of M theory, brains, 10-dimensional superstring theory. Okay, those are all from string theory, and they have to have all these dimensions in order to explain gravity or somehow merge quantum mechanics with general relativity. Okay, the world of particles are very small. We're the world of the macro world of cosmic, the universe. Then we have the Kaluza-Klein theory from 1921, five-dimensional universe. Okay, they need 5 dimensions to explain how this universe works. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Then we have the 4-dimensional one that people like Einstein came up with. He wasn't the first one. Even before that, you have Minkowski and Poincaré and so on. All these people already had come up with these ideas. Einstein simply took the credit for it. We have the 3D Euclidean world that comes from Euclides, Greek philosopher, whatever he was, just a guy who tried to do some geometry. Okay, the 2D world of Euclidean geometry, the planes. Then we have the 1D line. They call it the 1D line, but there's no such object, no such geometry as a 1D line. The 1D is not an object, it's not a figure, as we explained the other day. Okay, so there's no such monster. Turns out the wormhole, as we're going to argue today, is 1D. We're going to get into that. And then we have the 0 point, zero-dimensional point. What is that? Well, it's nothing. But they say that's what a black hole is. That's what the singularity at the Big Bang was. It was nothing. Okay, 0D is nothing. It's a definition of nothing. Okay, so let's find out how what we're going to do with this. We've got these dimensions. Here we have one fellow who you can see why they confuses people like this gentleman here who also got confused because the mathematicians never defined dimensions and coordinates and vectors, and so he uses these words. You can see here how he's going to use them, and it shows that he's got a lot of influence from the mathematicians. He was simply brainwashed by them. Here's you can see it here. Okay, speaks for himself. It says graphene is composed of a single layer of carbon atoms arranged in a 2-dimensional honeycomb lattice. It is a fundamental building block for a range of well-known carbon materials such as 3-dimensional graphite, 1-dimensional carbon nanotubes, and 0-dimensional fullerene. Okay? So where does he get all this stuff? Well, again, he's using these words from mathematics. He's not talking about dimensions. He's talking about number lines. Okay, not about dimensions. He's not talking about length, width, and height, which belong to physics. He's talking about number lines, and those don't have direction. Number line does not have direction. They put an arrow because they say numbers increase in that direction, but there is no direction. You can put numbers in any way you want. You can put them without a direction. Okay? The 2 is not in front of the 1, and the 3 is not in front of the 2. You can put them in any way. You can put the 3 behind the 1 and the 2 in front. You can do whatever you want with numbers. They have no location. Okay, and so it's when you put them in a line that it confuses people. They think they're talking about a line, which is what, 1-dimensional? Please draw it. And then he says the 2-dimensional motions. 2-dimensional motions. No, motion are not dimensional. Okay, you can talk about vectors, maybe number lines, but you cannot talk about 2-dimensional motions. No such monster. Okay, so where did wormholes come out of originally? I mean, how did we end up with 1-dimensional wormholes? Who came up with this nonsense? Okay, and here we have famous fellow. His name is Hermann Weyl, okay, or Weil in German. He's the inventor of the topological idea of wormholes in space-time. He was a student. He was a person who studied Einstein quite in detail. He wrote a couple books regarding general relativity. So he's one of the head honchos in those days in the 20s. okay, of general relativity. He pushed for general relativity. Whale spoke of one-dimensional tubes. Well, when I think of a tube, I think of a cylinder, like a hose maybe or something like that, and this is not what he's talking about. One-dimensional tube, like a contradiction in terms. What kind of tube is a one-dimensional tube? Please draw it. Okay, and this is where we have problems with what these people say, because they say one-dimensional tube, nobody challenges that, and they get away with murder. That's what's happening. Okay, inside these tubes, no space exists. First of all, space cannot exist because space is not an object, and only objects can exist because the word exists is an object that has location. So he's using the wrong notion of exist. He's got to define the word exist before he can use it, and he's just saying that it exists or doesn't exist. Now, space cannot exist. Space is nothing. Nothing does not exist. It's objects that can exist if they have location, not space, which is not a thing, and therefore has no location. Okay, so again, we see the faulty language that all these mathematicians use, and that's why people get confused out there. And their boundaries are analogous to infinite distance, inaccessible. So what they do, they put it beyond your grasp. They say it's infinite. It's at infinity. Go over there. And so you say, well, I'm not going to go over there. I'll just accept it. And that's what they do. They accept it on the basis of authority because the guy used the word infinity or infinite. Okay, that's how they get around these things. Okay, wormholes thread through space as air channels through Swiss cheese. Okay, so Swiss cheese has all these holes. So what are they explaining? They're explaining tubes going through this cheese, right? Space having all these holes through it, and they're one-dimensional tubes. We cannot even picture what these people are saying. They cannot picture it. They cannot draw it. Okay? But they get away with murder. Electricity is not electricity. Electricity is electric lines of force trapped in the topology of space. Okay, so we have electricity in there. Somehow it's these holes in space. Okay, Whale did not use the term wormholes. It was John Wheeler who later coined the term wormhole in 1957. Okay, so yeah. Herman Whale did not come up with that, but he had the idea, okay, the idea of the wormhole already. And here's how he defined it essentially. Einstein's spatially closed universe is often referred to as Einstein's cylinder world, with two of the spatial dimensions suppressed. Okay, so they take length, width, and height. That's what they're talking about. Okay, they're going to remove two dimensions. They're going to leave length or width or height, one of the three, right? But look what they say. They suppress two dimensions. The model universe can be pictured as a cylinder with one dimension, okay? Where the radius, A, represents the space. Radius? What radius can you have with one dimension if you took two dimensions out? And the axis, the time coordinate. In other words, what is that single axis? It's time. And that's what Whale was thinking about when he was thinking of his famous wormhole. He didn't call it a wormhole, but that's what he was referring to. He was referring to one-dimensional, what? Time. What is time? Is it a dimension? No, it's not a coordinate. It's not a vector. It's a number line. That's what time is. It's not a dimension as mathematicians want you to use the word to define it or to characterize it. Okay, so we're talking about time. That's what the wormhole is. It's time. And here you have another vision of that, okay? You have this wormhole that they say you can cut across space by thinking of space as something that's curved around, okay? And they're going to have time go through this from one place to another, shortcutting the trip around that whole region there. So they're just going to have you moving through this so-called wormhole. And what is that wormhole? You're traveling through time. You're traveling through one-dimensional time, meaning a number line. They're talking about, a number line. You're traveling through a number line, a one-dimensional number line. They're not talking about anything that's thick. They're saying it's a tube, but the tube is one-dimensional, and they're referring to time. So yeah, it's very confusing, okay, because they cannot illustrate what they're saying. That's the issue. They cannot even imagine what they're saying. That's the whole point. Okay, so what is the definition of a wormhole? Is it a thing? Is it an object? Well, here you have wormholes. This is one fellow who, I think this is out of the Wikipedia. It says, space can be visualized as a two-dimensional surface. Uh-huh, not true, because space is nothing. So it's not a surface, and it's not two-dimensional, and you cannot visualize it. Space is absolutely nothing. We take all the atoms from the universe away somehow, we have absolutely nothing in front of us. In this case, a wormhole would appear as a hole in that surface. So here they create a two-dimensional flat surface. Think of it a piece of paper, even though it's 3D, but try to think of it as a flat sheet of paper, okay, completely flat. And they're going to put a hole in there. So now you're looking at it from the top, and you're saying, well, that's a surface now. Okay, so you're looking at the hole from above and you see a surface, okay? Lead into a 3D tube. I thought it was a 1D tube. Now they turned it into a 3D tube. The inside surface of a cylinder. Yeah, a cylinder is 3D, but that's not what a wormhole is. Wormhole is 1D, as Mr. Weil told us, okay? And that's also what Einstein referred to when he created this monster. Then reemerge at another location on a 2D surface with a hole similar to the entrance. In other words, they're referring to black holes. They're saying that the ends of a wormhole are 0D singularities, and those are the centers of black holes. Okay, so we have a wormhole that's connecting two black holes. One is in, I guess, one universe, the other one in another universe, or different points of space, or however you want to think of them. Okay, and as you can see, it's so realistic what they're showing you there. But people love to draw wormholes. I mean, you've got millions of people out there drawing wormholes because they absolutely love the concept. Okay, and they try to illustrate, and they're illustrating poppycock. That's what they're illustrating. They're illustrating something which has no possibility of even being real. Okay, an actual wormhole would be analogous to this, but with the spatial dimensions raised by one. What do you mean spatial dimensions raised by one? For example, instead of circular holes on a 2D plane, the entry and exit points could be visualized as spherical holes in 3D space, leading into a four-dimensional tube similar to a spherindor or spherindor. Okay, what's a spherindor? Well, it's a geometric object, they say, okay, defined as the Cartesian product of a three-ball or a solid two-sphere, whatever all that nonsense means, of radius r1 and a line segment. The line segment, what is that? That's going to be time. So it's not a line segment. They're talking about time, which is a number line. It's not even a line. Like the duo cylinder, it is also analogous to a cylinder in 3 space, which is the Cartesian product of a disk with a line segment. Okay, let's find out what a duo cylinder is. It's a geometric object again. It is it? Embedded in a 4-dimensional Euclidean space, defined as the Cartesian product of 2 disks. Well, all the images that you see on the right, which apparently are the wormhole, the spherindor, and the duo cylinder, as you can see, they're all 3D projections onto 2D surface. So all the images are 2D, but they're trying to project a 3D image onto a 2D. None of those are 4D. And you cannot illustrate the 4D that these people are trying to explain in a roundabout way. In fact, even the famous warped space-time that mathematicians dealt since the days of 1915 or even earlier, even that is 3D. All of these images are 3D projections onto 2D. None of them are 4D, and you cannot even imagine the 4D, let alone picture it, illustrate it. You cannot depict it. Okay? You cannot draw an image of a 4D, no matter how you try. In fact, if it's got time embodied in it, you're talking about motion. So you're not talking about a static image like a table or a rock. You're talking about something in motion. When you stop it, meaning no time, what you have is 3D. 3D. You have the table. So they're saying a table that moves is a four-dimensional table. That's what they're saying. And a rock that moves is a four-dimensional table because now you have to include time in what you're staring at. So you're talking about a movie, not about a static image that you can just illustrate. That's why they cannot illustrate the 4D, because it's got time in it. Okay, so here's another fellow, but he says that it's not an object like these people are trying to tell you, all these so-called objects. This fellow, he says that it's a mathematical concept and nothing but. And he's prominent in Quora, so you can find him very easily. His name is Victor Toth. I talked about him in the past. And he says the following about wormholes. He says, wormholes in general, relativity, are mathematically valid solutions of Einstein's field equations, the equation that describes gravity and curved spacetime, which connect distant regions of space. Okay, so he's saying that, look, it's just a solution to an equation. So this nonsense about, there being a tube out there in space connecting different points of space, that's nonsense. So he doesn't say it that obvious that he doesn't believe in this nonsense, but he just suggests, insinuates that maybe they don't exist. Of course they don't exist. It's because it's poppycock. It's nonsense. Okay, so here you have it. This is what the tesseract is, okay, which is another notion that they have for the 4D. And all it is just an expanding cube. That's all that the tesseract is. There is no such thing as a tesseract. It's not a four-dimensional object because the only way you can present the tesseract is in motion, and you're talking about time. That's what those corner lines are. Those are indicating time. So none of the objects that these people present are 4D. And likewise, you cannot present the 0D, which is the so-called singularity that's gave rise to the Big Bang or is in the center of every black hole. There's no such monster as 0D. And likewise, there's nothing like the 1D, which is what the wormhole is alleged to be, because the wormhole is just time. That's all it is. And time is a number line. And so they talk about dimension, they talk about tubes. Some call it the 1D tube, the others call it the 3D tube because you can picture that, a cylinder, and people say, okay, I understood that. Yeah, you understood it, but you're not understanding. You're not understanding what the Einstein-Rosen bridge is. And so they went a step further, and it was Einstein and a couple of his buddies who came up in 1935 with two concepts that created a lot of this stuff. Okay, they expanded on Mr. Wales' notion and they mathematized it. Okay, here it is. Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, they came up with EPR. That's what EPR stands for, Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen. And they were criticizing quantum mechanics in 1935. They didn't like quantum mechanics. So they created this thing which today is known as entanglement. Okay. And a couple months later, Einstein and Rosen, they came up with ER, the particle problem in general theory of relativity, where they also, went in there and said, well, how do we handle things such as wormholes? And that's where the wormhole came into being formally with ER, okay? And so what happened since then? Well, we had these two individuals, Juan Maldacena, a person from co-national of mine, and another fellow, Susskind, those who know him, Leo Susskind from California, and they proposed the following. They said ER is equal to EPR. They're both the same, and it's what they call a conjecture, okay, in physics. And this is essentially what they're referring to, which is essentially the definition of a wormhole today. It states that two entangled particles, a so-called Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen or EPR pair, are connected by what? A wormhole, or an Einstein-Rosen bridge, which is the second paper that the Einstein wrote that a couple months later, right? ER equal EPR is thought by some to be a basis for unifying general relativity and quantum mechanics into a theory of everything. That's why it's so important to these people. Because if they can say, look, a wormhole that goes through space and connects to black holes is pretty much like, the whatever that connects two particles during entanglement. This particle affects that one over there instantaneously. Well, wormhole in space connects two wormholes instantaneously. And so it's a conjecture. Why? Because they haven't proven the existence of wormholes. They claim to have proven the existence of black holes, right? And so, yeah, they're working on this because of that. And Leo Susskind and Juan Maldacena in 2013 proposed that a wormhole is equivalent to a pair of maximally entangled black holes. Okay, so they're using these words to try to unite general relativity with quantum mechanics. That's why it's so important to them. That's why they're working on it. That's why they're spending your tax dollars on this nonsense. EPR refers to quantum entanglement, the EPR paradox. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Okay, you can see there on the one hand you have EPR on the right, and you have ER, the Einstein-Rosen bridge, which is the wormhole. One is cosmic, and the other one is here in the lab. You can say that the one on the left has to do with general relativity, the one on the right has to do with quantum mechanics. And if they can get those united, well, you can see where they're going with all this. They're trying to make sure that you understand that what's between two particles is a wormhole. And what's between two black holes is a wormhole. What is a wormhole? It's a one-dimensional time, which is a number line. That's what they're talking about. So when you're traveling through a wormhole, yeah, you're not traveling through a 3D tube cylinder, you're traveling through time. That's what they're saying. So that's what all this nonsense is all about. Okay, so where do we put the wormhole in our universal movie? Is it a static concept? Is it an object? Is it a dynamic concept? What is a wormhole? Okay, and here we have it. We put it as a dynamic concept. That's what they're referring to. Why? Because it has to do with time. Okay, so that's what the issue is. Wormhole is time. In fact, it's not having to do, it is time. Whenever they talk about wormhole, they're talking about time. Time is what? Is it one dimensional? No, it's one number line. Wormhole is time. Time is a number line. That's all they're talking about. So when they say you're traveling through a wormhole, you're just traveling through time. Okay? Can we talk about holes in general? Like, and I'm not talking about those kinds of holes. Talking about, or nose holes, right? No, we're talking about black holes and wormholes, okay? Can we talk about holes without there being something into which the hole goes, or through which the hole goes through? Okay, and that's the question. Here you have a groundhog hole. Okay, we all can relate to that. That's more or less what a groundhog groundhog hole looks like underneath the ground. Okay, it looks something like that. What if we were removed to remove the trees, and we remove the groundhog, we remove the ground, we remove everything except the hole? What would we have? Well, we would have something that looks like this. That's what a groundhog hole looks like without everything else. That's what a hole looks like. A hole is a concept. It's not a standalone object. So you will not have a something there, for you to see or touch or whatever. Okay, so there's no such thing as a hole. Hole is a concept. Okay, so what happens to a wormhole? Well, they show you something that looks more or less like this, and they say that's a wormhole. And everybody looks and says, yeah, I recognize that's a wormhole. But what is the wormhole through? Well, they say it's through space. Okay, the hole perforates space because you're going to go from one region of space to another. You're going to enter one black hole, zero-dimensional black hole, going to go through this tube, 3D tube. You're going to end, which is a hole, really, through space, and you're going to end up, or come out of a black hole on the other side of the universe, or maybe in another universe, for all we know. So if space is nothing, what is the black hole through? Well, here I'll show you. I'll illustrate that for you. Here it is. That's what it's through. That's what a wormhole looks like without space. Okay, because if space is nothing, the hole is absolutely nothing as well. Okay, so yeah, what can we say? This is what you're traveling through when you're saying that you're traveling through space. Okay, let me remove this little thing here. Okay, so what can we conclude? Wormhole is not a thing, so it's very hard to put it into a static concept because it's time, a synonym of time. So you're traveling through time, and so time is a dynamic concept. We would put it under the universal movie, would put it together with the dynamic concepts. And then the other thing is that without space, you have no wormhole. The only way you can have a wormhole if space is something, if it's a thing. You can run a hole through Swiss cheese, as they were saying, or you can make a gopher hole if you have the ground. Without the ground, without the Swiss cheese, you have no hole. Okay, so let's get that straight first. And likewise, if a wormhole is through space, and if you remove space from the wormhole, you have no hole. And you don't have to remove space because space, by definition, is nothing, that which has no shape. There is nothing there. So it's as if you remove the ground from the groundhog hole, and it's if you remove the cheese from the holes in the cheese, Swiss cheese, right? Then you have no holes. And that's what happens to the wormhole. Wormhole is absolutely nothing, just like a black hole. With that, I'll see you next Sunday. We'll see you then. Bye bye.